Welcome back to another edition of the Unpopular Kids. It is I, your host, Nelson Moises Lassiter, and I have a very, very special guest today. Please introduce yourself to everybody out there.
How's it going, everyone? My name is Daniel Gradias.
Can you say that again? What is
Gradias.
Gradias.
If you want to say it like in English, I guess, you can say Daniel Gradias. But
my co-host, Daniel Gradias, today.
Thanks for having me on, man.
Wait, so you can finish what you were going to say.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, like, I had, like, we were in a, Latinos are supposed to be minorities, but we were in, like, I was in a sea of Latinos in high school. Like, that was, like, the majority of, like, my town and everything. And every time, like, a black family would move into the town, they would immediately move out, like, really quickly. Like, I didn't understand it. There was always like maybe one black kid in school, you know what I mean? It was very...
Why would they move out?
It was a very conservative town. It's because of a very conservative town and, like, I don't know.
Wait, did Latinos not want black people there?
I have no idea, like, but it's interesting that, like, they would, like, a family would move in and then they would be there for like a year or two and then they would move out.
Wow. So,
right? Isn't that strange?
Given that very interesting upbringing, what's your impression of black people? Choose your words wisely.
Oh, wow. Can I touch your hair?
It's like, what does your hair feel like? Is it like a Brillo pad or a sponge?
My opinion on all black people, because they're all one thing, is...
Oh, gosh.
I'm not going to finish that sentence because I don't have an answer to that
sentence.
Just wait.
Yeah, that's very Joe Biden.
Anyway, sorry. That was a random little tidbit about my past.
It's okay. I mean, listen, I did an entire podcast about my past, so it's completely fine. Yeah.
You did. I saw that. It was great. It was interesting. Learned about it.
I was like, it's great. My past is great. Okay.
No, I mean, like, the way that you were able to discuss it and, like, you were talking about your experience, and I think that's what this podcast is all about, right? It's you're not a journalist. I'm not a journalist. We're talking about things that are happening in the world through our own experiences and through our lens of experiencing the world, right?
I'm not a journalist? Damn it! All this time. I mean, listen, though, you turn on the news, like, how many of them are actually journalists?
Everybody's a pundit, right?
Everyone is a talking head. Everyone has an opinion, and we're taught to believe that everyone's opinion is valid, and I'll leave it there.
Our opinions are very, very, very valid, by the way.
Well, so. I mean, the thing that I, really focus on is less about, opinions, and a lot of it is just about just the facts or the truth. Mm-hmm. And by that, that's why the very first podcast, I told a personal story, because that's something that you can't debate whether it happened or not. It did. Mm-hmm. So that's really what I try to focus on in whatever topics that we get to. It's just like, what does history actually reveal? What does, the actual reactions of something actually reveal? What does, what are the consequences? Because those are the facts. You can have an opinion on what you think might happen, but, like, you can't dispute what happens. You can, talk shit to
I don't know. It is
2020. Exactly, but this is the thing.
Facts are disputable nowadays.
This is why we need this, because when you get to a point where facts are disputable, that's when you're like, okay, we have a serious problem.
Right.
Like, prime example. You can, let's say you're like talking shit directly in my face. You can have person A say, I think he's going to just take it. I think he's just going to punch him in the face. Everyone has all these opinions on what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Let's say actually do punch you in the face. That is the fact. So on this podcast, we will talk about the punch in the face, not will he or will he not punch in the face.
Right. No speculation.
No speculation.
I feel that.
Like, listen, everyone's entitled to their own opinions, but you cannot deny
the facts.
Exactly. Yeah. And there are no alternative facts here. We're not Kellyanne Conwaying this shit. Not today, Karen.
It is really interesting that her husband's so like vocal, you know?
Yeah.
It's like, wouldn't that be weird if like your like husband was like,
I don't think so.
Like constantly like fucking with your boss like all the time on Twitter all the time?
I don't think so, because it's kind of like, you know, for a lot of these people, it is just like political theater. You know,
yeah, right.
Because they're in a position where the decisions and the things that they say to the general public won't really change their lifestyle, won't really change their way of living. Right. So, you know, they'll be fine either way.
Of course.
You know,
yeah.
So like for them, it's less about, you know, he's doing something to damage my career. Like nothing is going to change my perception of Kellyanne Conway at this point. So
I'm not like giving her an
So what it is though, it's like a great way to, the reason why I said political theater is because it's like, you know, let's say you're married to someone who is on a reality show.
Right.
And their job is to get as many people to watch that show as possible, and they have to continually do these outrageous things. But that person you see on TV, a lot of the times is very different than the person that is at home.
Sometimes.
But it's the same with like, you know,
I work in reality TV. So.
That's very true. Oh yeah. Or like another prime example is like, let's say, you know, you're married to someone who is the CEO of this mega corporation. The way they act at work is very different than the way they act at home. Sometimes they do take work home, and then you gotta like, you know.
No, I see what you're saying.
Yeah. So
I was mostly just joking around.
No, but I mean it's interesting though, because, you know, it is something that I truly believe when it comes to a lot of these politicians and talking heads and this and that, where, you know, Kellyanne Conway, you know, maybe publicly she, you know, like I've yet to see her publicly, you know, like go on the attack of her husband posting and saying the stuff that he posts. That being the case, then that definitely means, you know, she's not offended or it's like under her skin to the point where she has to, you know, retaliate.
Right.
So that being the case, I think that there is a distinction between, you know, the public Kellyanne Conway and the private Kellyanne Conway.
Completely.
Because they seem to be perfectly fine together. I don't know.
We don't know.
I don't know, but the fact that he posts all that and they can still go home and be bedfellows, you know, that means that either they're really good at separating the work from their private life.
I think Kelly's really good at doing her job. You know what I mean? Like, she's really good at doing her job.
I actually believe that Kelly goes to the highest bidder.
Yeah, I think so too.
Now, I will say this is an opinion. This is an opinion.
Yeah.
As after we just did this rant about opinions, right? Yeah. I will say, I believe that Kellyanne Conway goes to the highest bidder. So like if someone on the liberal side offered her like millions of dollars, she would flip that script and find a way to spin that story for that paycheck. That's my belief.
There's probably some sort of version of Kellyanne Conway on the liberal side that but like behind the scenes that we just don't know about. You know what I mean? Don't you think?
I mean,
they're all politicians, you know.
Yes, but I guess if they exist, it's a missed opportunity.
Right. To have that person
and not use them. Yeah.
Snake oil exactly. Not using them to their advantage.
I mean, what's your take on that? Like, what is your take on, you know, a liberal snake oil salesman? I mean, we have a lot of Republican snake oil salesmen, a lot of conservative snake oil salesmen. What are your thoughts on a liberal version of that? Are you pro that or against that?
I think in theory that I'm against it, but then when I want to like think about like winning and like needing to like advance things forward, maybe I'm for it, but I think I'm diametrically like opposed to like lying to people that are voting for you.
So you're for it in the sense of if it can actually further the agenda for positive change.
But if it was like for facts, like if it was for factual things and trying to make the case for fact-based policy, which is what progressives are doing. They're trying to advocate for fact-based policy, you know? And
well, there's a problem.
And there's a problem with that?
Well, no, there's a problem in how they're trying to advocate for it.
Yeah, right.
But we'll get to that later.
But like, so in that sense, there's not really Kellyanne, there's not a snake oil salesman that can do that, because you're not really selling snake oil to people who are unwittingly buying it.
Right.
You're selling in the actual truth of factually based.
Right. But here's the thing though. Are people more receptive to the snake oil because, are people more receptive to the snake oil than they are with the facts?
Because it's more shiny and more
that's exactly where I'm going.
More exciting.
Exactly.
More
so
entertaining.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So if you have to repackage the facts in the form of this, enticing snake oil that people will want to have, what is wrong with that if that snake oil is based in fact and facts that can actually improve
and it's
your
not
way
snake
of life?
Oil, it's just a entertaining way to get across the point. Is it not?
I guess so. But I guess using those snake oil tactics. Because the thing is, I just feel that, there is this perception that liberals are these elitists and they're super smart and they don't really understand the common man. And that is something, and I actually, when I hear that, I'm like, well, do we have a language problem or a communication problem when it comes to talking to the common man? And we do. And it's something that conservatives have mastered really, really well. I remember watching the Beto O'Rourke, Ted Cruz debate, where everyone was like, Beto's going to flip Texas. And I was like, oh no, man, based on how this man talks, he just seems so disconnected from the average person. Now, liberals will hear me say that and be like, what the hell are you talking about? I'm like, what? Prime example. In the debate, the moderator asked Beto, he goes, what are your thoughts on illegal immigration? And Beto goes, well, I'm really happy that you asked me that question, and I believe that Texas can be this great framework for the rest of the country. Coming from El Paso, where there is, my population is 90% Latino, I truly understand that the struggles and the things that people face. And he goes into this long tangent just to say that he supports some type of law that allows a path to citizenship. That is where he wanted to go. It took him forever to get there. Then they go to Ted Cruz. And they say, Ted Cruz, Senator Cruz, same question. And Cruz goes, well, I've always been from the school of thought, legal good, illegal bad. And everyone was like, rah!
Well, that's that goes back to a messaging problem. Really, at the end of the day, it's marketing. You know what I mean? It's really marketing and finding that really biteable big message. I mean, that. It's kind of like reality TV a little bit. You know what I mean? And we have a reality television star as president. You can learn a little bit from. So
you have to learn those tactics. Yeah, exactly.
You can't. It's not. But it's not. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing to find something that's marketable to people that people can understand in less than 30 seconds. You know what I mean?
That's all it takes.
And I think that's important when you're doing messaging like that. But to Beto's credit, he didn't lose just because of that. He lost. He lost because he's in a very red state still. I mean, yes, it's wavering. It's
right, but Texas has had Democratic senators.
Yeah, it's true. But Beto turned out the vote toward Democrats way more than it has ever been in the past several cycles. So
he still lost by 200,000.
Yeah, but you kind of
that's a lot.
You kind of think he's gonna lose. I don't know. He was very exciting and he raised a lot of money, but he's still in Texas and he's still in a very conservative stronghold, even though it is a more purple state nowadays.
Well, they keep saying it's purple every year, and I'm like, okay.
They just keep saying that because of the demographics, i.e. like greater Latino
Right, but this
population.
is a huge fallacy that I think comes from that. People tend to think because you are Latino, you will generally vote left. And that is not the case, especially in Florida.
Yeah.
You know, majority of the Latino, not majority, but a lot of the Latino voters in Florida actually are conservative. You know, so it's interesting how the liberals frame this, you know, this POC narrative. Before we go a little bit into that, another thing I want to bring up, since we're talking about, you know, since we mentioned the Beto Ted Cruz thing, another issue with messaging too, I think that liberals don't control the narrative. They don't own the narrative. And a prime example is exactly that illegal question. First of all, the question was framed in a way that set Beto up to fail. Mm-hmm. Because the question was about illegal immigrants, not undocumented immigrants or some other piece of terminology.
Yeah, I mean, I have to see the question. I have to like watch it.
It's really interesting, but it's fascinating because it seems like the conservatives are so quick to come out with terms and frame the narrative in a way that favors them regardless with what happens. Like Obamacare, the Affordable Health Care Act, you know, like our entire like healthcare law. They took that and framed it under him to the point that everyone, including the liberals, adopted that. And it has been used against him to the point that conservatives that actually are on Obamacare don't even know they're on Obamacare and they're against Obamacare.
Right.
Like that is what's fascinating about messaging.
But there was a moment that, you know, the Obama administration started just kind of like owning that term because there was no going back. So like they started using it themselves and like
right, but that's the point though. It's about
but like I think having ownership over something and taking ownership over something means something. You know what I mean?
I mean it can mean something, but it means something to the people that are taking ownership over it.
Right.
But it doesn't help their cause and the greater narrative because of the fact that the narrative is already skewed in a way to be unfavorable.
You know, it's funny. It's like it's funny because everybody calls like Hollywood like the liberal elite, and like Hollywood's like, you know, we're a town of storytellers, people who like write for a living, people who like, you know, are in marketing and advertising, and you would think that like they would like siphon off some of that talent to create something that's like more biteable, like more like, you know, more digestible to the general public who doesn't listen to politics every single day.
Now I think we're really bad with it.
Like, but I think if you made the case, like if you actually made the case for progressive values, and you actually like explained what it would mean for a working class family to have universal health care or a working class family to have a basic minimum wage, if you made the case for it, people would listen. And it's all about like creating that narrative that makes sense.
Again, you know? Exactly. It's about creating and owning the narrative, which we are not good at doing.
Yeah, I agree. You know? Well, I agree with you. I'm not arguing against you.
No, that's fine. I'm just bring it on back.
Yeah, totally.
Bring it on back. Bring it on back. Well, that's the thing. And it's so funny because, you know, out of all of these creatives we have in Hollywood, like the best creative ideas politically come out of these like DC think tanks.
Yeah, and those are the worst ones because you can always tell what came out of a DC think tank, especially like in like a, you know, a debate or anything like that. And you're like,
those are those talking points.
Why'd you do that? You know what I mean? Like, gosh, why'd she say it like that? Like, Jesus Christ.
Like, Kamala, I'm like, busing? No one gives a flying flip about busing right now.
I mean, I clapped. I was excited.
I was just like, woman, lady, listen. People are suffering. Okay, like, busing? My feelings were hurt. Oh my gosh, listen. I have people that were shot by cops. My feelings are hurt. Okay, let's talk about
that.
that.
The point was that Biden actually had like worked with people that were against busing and like who were, you know, actually active segregationists. That was like the whole point of it.
Half of Congress was active segregationists.
Yeah.
What are you supposed to do?
Yeah.
Not get anything passed?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just saying that was the point of.
No, 100%. But I think, her point was ill-informed in the sense of understand that you were using this personal story, which can't be disputed. I'm not contesting that, but just because to point the finger at him, like, listen, in the 60s and in the 70s and in the 80s, well, 60s and 70s for the most part, like especially in the 60s, so like half of Congress were segregationists. Like, majority of the country didn't even want to integrate the schools, but they had to, and it got to the point where they had to have the National Guard come in to make it happen. So, like, you can't say that you made it, you worked side by side with a segregationist to get this bill passed. Well, if he didn't work side by anything, nothing liberal would have gotten passed at all.
Yeah, right.
So it's about picking your battles.
Yeah.
And I think that I understand that she was trying to find a debate point, but I think that it was very short-sighted. Mm-hmm. And I think what worked against Biden is that, he, in my opinion, isn't quick enough to like come back at that.
No, yeah, he wasn't, but that's what we're coming back to political theater, though. That was a really great piece of political theater on her part.
Initially,
because her approval ratings skyrocketed after that.
Then she kept bringing it up again and again.
That's the thing.
And I'm like,
the messaging and the marketing. Like, it didn't.
Was that your only ace in the hole? Like,
exactly. Then it became like it sounded like rehearsed and like.
Right, you're going to need a little bit more than that.
And then she dipped, but like that particular moment in the debates was really like people were like, "Oh, I can see this person going up against Donald Trump." You know what I mean? Right. Like it was because you almost have to like cast the person to go up against Donald Trump.
Right.
I would not cast Joe Biden in that role.
Who would you so as a casting director, this is great. Who would you, especially as a casting director for reality?
Yeah, for reality, yeah.
Who would you cast in the live action reality series, blank versus Trump?
Blank versus Trump.
Who would you cast based off of that original debate poll that we had?
So, out of the original debate pool. Okay, so like out of all the 20 Democrats that were running.
Blessed be the heavens on earth. Yes.
Well, initially I really liked Kamala because I liked the optics of a prosecutor going after a criminal.
That makes a nice story.
Makes a great story. And listen, she knows, she's been to court, she's been into battle, so like into legal battle.
She's been to battle.
Into legal battle, yeah, totally. But and then I was watching her more and more, and I was like, oh man, like I feel like she's getting on this track of like sounding seemingly disingenuous and blah blah blah. Maybe and
she was pushing for sound bites.
And I don't necessarily believe she's disingenuous, but it started coming off like that to me.
To hers.
And then I was like, oh man, it's gonna go bad for her.
So who was next?
Let's see, who was next?
So like she turned down the offer.
Yeah.
So who would you go out to?
And then I was a huge fan of Senator Warren as well. Just because she can talk circles around anyone, and she knows how to make those big ideas into like a biteable.
That is actually she is really
very good at it, and she knows how to explain things very well. For me personally, my casting brain is like being tainted by the fact that I wanted a female as our nominee. Just because we had this like beautiful, diverse group of people,
right?
And I just love the idea of like having a diverse person go up against somebody who's so blatantly racist. So
right.
like it would have been wonderful to have a woman, a person of color,
We had a woman go up against someone that was blatantly racist, and we saw how the country responded to that.
Right. Yeah. but listen, but that particular woman, she fell prey to a lot of sexism. One thing,
right? So
but also she had a huge. She comes from a huge dynasty from Washington.
That has come from a dynasty. Only her husband. Your husband doesn't make it a dynasty.
She's created the dynasty. I mean, listen, she's been in government for decades, and then even when her husband was president, she was still like working. She was like doing a lot of policy work while she was first lady.
I mean, would you prefer to just like bake apple
There's
pies?
A lot. No, of course not. But there's a lot of animus towards a woman who wants to make a change and make some room for herself to make a change.
Right, and that being the case, what makes you think that would be different for Warren if she's the same type?
Yeah, it was difficult for me to think about that because I knew that it was going to happen again. But I think also, Warren has a different narrative. She has a different, messaging system that Clinton does not have.
But, in my opinion, Warren falls right into Trump's traps. When Trump attacked her about her saying that she was part Native American, she could have just let it drop.
I know.
Instead,
I really hated that whole thing.
She had to go and get a DNA test just to prove you're playing right into his hands.
I know.
It's literally like the equivalent.
It's don't show the birth certificate. Just don't do it.
Yeah. Exactly. I mean, exactly. Don't play into that. Yeah. Otherwise, that person, you're showing that person you can get under their skin, that they can win.
Yeah. And that's his whole thing. He bullies. So he wants to bully you into submission. So
because it works for him.
Terms.
It works for him.
Totally.
And very few people have, proven that they can, that they found a workaround from that. And that's what's really interesting. It's even the conservative party, the Republicans are many of them are just afraid of him. Because he's amassed so many supporters and has this level of bullying power that the entire schoolyard is just kind of he's stupid. He doesn't really say anything that makes sense, but I'm not going to get in his way. If I just continue to live in my own bubble over here, I will be okay. But what the people tend to forget is that in the schoolyard scenario, some people, you might be that person that can be totally fine in that bubble, but there are other kids that are going to suffer the wrath of this bully, and their lives are going to be impacted by it in so many negative ways. So it's who in the schoolyard has what it takes to take on the bully?
Exactly. And then obviously, Bernie Sanders just has a beautiful way of words.
Yeah.
I mean, and he is more aligned to me politically than than most of the people on that stage at one point.
He can inspire,
and he knows how to galvanize people into a message. You know what I mean? And
he's really good at messaging.
And he's good at messaging.
He is really, really good at messaging.
Yeah.
He is. He understands marketing.
Yeah.
But he does have. There are some issues that I do have with his messaging. I do feel that his messaging is so. I feel like it's specific in a lot of ways to a particular demographic within the Democratic Party and not the big tent. Because, moderate Democrats who are liberals and vote Democrat are afraid of him in a lot of ways. And I think what progressives tend to forget is that the Democratic Party is not just them.
Right.
And I think that the issue that I have with Bernie
we've had to make up for what the Republicans have been doing for the last several cycles, which is get more and more radical
and
right.
I
mean, there's very few moderate Republicans in office right now.
100%.
And now we just have to have that big tent, unfortunately.
Exactly. That's the thing.
Maybe that's fortunate.
That's the thing. You can't just appeal to the progressives. Yeah. You have to be able to appeal to the moderates, and and that is, and the thing is too that a lot of people tend to forget is that a large portion of the Democratic Party is still very moderate. You got the 40-year-olds, the 50s, the 60s, the 70s. The ones that are very progressives are like, the younger half of millennials and Gen Z that's finally getting able to vote. And the thing about that is, you can, let's say you're giving this message about, free college and like student loan debt forgiveness. Like for people like me, that sounds fantastic. But I am also a strong believer that college is not for everybody.
Right.
And it's like, you hear him hammer that message and you're like, okay, but that doesn't really pertain to me.
I think at the end of the day, nobody's going to be perfect. And we keep on looking for that perfect person, which just does not exist because people are not perfect.
That's exactly it. And that is what's going to continue.
Except for Obama.
I mean,
I'm just kidding.
Listen, if you've seen this MFer play basketball, he's like,
and he's just like you want to have a beer with him.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I could do an entire segment just fangirling over Mr. Barry Bonds because he is, and he can poke fun at himself.
But even Obama was not perfect.
Not at all.
You know what I mean? His
even in his imperfections, I still, Well, here's the thing, though. I also feel like when it comes to a lot of these voters too. Their reality of how politics works is very skewed because we experienced other presidents and not just Obama.
Right.
There are people that when it comes to their
just kidding.
I mean, he's better than what we have now. Like the thought that W would be like.
2020 is the only time where I'm like, I miss Bush.
It's like, where are those, those W-like Republicans? Like, I would, listen, okay, fine.
I will take the Cheney version of corruption any day over this version of corruption.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. It is ridiculous.
Cheney, though. Yeah.
I watched that movie. It was interesting.
I'm so sorry I cut you off.
I was saying something.
You were going to go somewhere.
I was going somewhere. But wherever that where is...
It was probably lies anyway. Liberal propaganda lies.
Liberal propaganda from the liberal propaganda machine propped up by the liberal media, supported by the liberal elites.
George Soros is actually funding this. I wish he would give us more money.
I was literally about to say that. I was like, if he's funding this, please show me the receipts.
Use a little primping of the sets, maybe. I don't know. This is really nice.
A better backdrop. Can you get some crew here? That would be fantastic. Soros.
George Soros. Come on.
What's happening here? It's not going to cost that much. You got a couple billion. I just need a G. That's nothing. That's 1% of what you have.
Wealth tax.
Less than 1. That's 0.1%. Dude, help the bro out. Anyway.
I digress.
It's okay. I've always said, I was like, if every millionaire would just give me $1.
You'd have $4.
Well, in New York, there are, at minimum, 600,000 millionaires living in New York.
You'd have $600,000 in New York.
And with New York rent, that would be gone in 2 days.
But what were you talking about?
Yeah, so we were talking about messaging, and you were saying Bernie. Right. So you would cast Bernie Sanders in the reality show of Bernie versus Trump.
Yeah, I mean, if all the people left at one point, I was like, okay, Bernie.
Here's my impression of Bernie versus.
I just for me, I'm just we ended up with two old white dudes. No offense to white people.
That's the history of America. It's too old, right?
But it's just we could have shattered some ceilings and done something.
We had the opportunity to do that in 2016 in Americans Blue. Here's the thing, though. My impression, I picture if Bernie was going up against the bully in the schoolyard, people would gather around and they would cheer for Bernie.
Yeah.
Now, if Biden was going up against the bully, like a few people would be there, but like they would still want him to win.
Biden is going up against the bully.
Right, exactly. I'm just saying, like, if, him doing it, like a few people would watch. They would want him to win to get rid of the bully, but they wouldn't be cheering him on.
Right.
Like Bernie would like talk the bully into like smithereens. Biden would get like punched by the bully, whimper a little bit. Then he'd get back. He'll get back up. And he'll get punched again, and then at least he'll get back up.
Yeah,
and then people would be like, "All right, we should rally behind him, or he's going to die." But either way,
this analogy is actually like playing out
exactly.
Right now.
Exactly. It's like, listen, he's not the one we wanted to fight the bully, but if we can rally behind him, we'll be able to take this bully down.
Totally. Have you heard of this Instagram account called Settle for Biden?
I've been seeing the memes popping up.
It's so great because I was getting a lot of I was feeling very nervous because I saw some Bernie people that were being very controversial about this whole thing, and it was giving me anxiety because it was giving me anxiety back to 2016
flashbacks. PTSD.
And I'm like, there are people in immediate danger.
Mm-hmm.
There are children still in cages. There are families that are getting poisoned in custody, in ICE detention centers. Mm-hmm. There is a pandemic happening where thousands of people are dying. So there are people in immediate danger that we need to address and do triage for. And we can't just throw that all away because you want to be right, or you want to have you want to have the liberal. You want the litmus test of liberalism of Jesus Christ. You know what I mean? And I'm just like, hey, there is real suffering happening.
Right. There are bigger things at stake than your hurt feelings.
Exactly.
And that's it's true. It's
but I understand.
You understand the feelings. You understand.
Feeling.
And here's my thing. I understand the hurt feelings, and I understand.
I do too.
Why they're upset. But at the same time, you also have to understand that in this time it was actually a fair Democratic primary, he lost.
Yeah.
And it was a fair Democratic primary where he actually was a part of changing the rules that they operated under this time.
Yeah.
And even then, he lost.
We're opening Pandora's box right now.
We are opening Pandora's box, but the thing though is that, people can come up with the conspiracy theories that they want, but the numbers don't lie. And the rules that Bernie put in place, and the DNC was afraid of having polarization within the party, that they let him put these new rules in place.
Right.
And he still lost.
Yeah.
So, that to me is not that it's not that I don't think that Bernie wouldn't have been able to win. I think moderates would have voted for him regardless, because moderates vote for whoever is the liberal candidate, unlike progressives. But I feel that it just shows that not all of the party was ready for his message.
So one point to that is that, just to play devil's advocate,
yeah, sure.
But is that he was piled upon by all the establishment people, right? So
because he was a front runner.
When it came down to Bernie and our current candidate,
mm-hmm.
It was all of these establishment people jumped on Bernie and silenced him and blah blah blah, and so that's the new narrative that's playing out right now.
What do you mean silenced him though?
But that's the narrative that's playing out right now, that the DNC was we got to go after Bernie. We must get.
How did the DNC go after him?
I'm just playing devil's advocate,
because
but telling all the moderate candidates to endorse Biden, you know what I mean?
Endorsements don't mean anything. It's all about the people that show up to vote.
Right.
Bernie can get Bernie can get all the endorsements. Listen, Hillary had Obama's endorsement, for crying out loud.
Mm-hmm.
That didn't make more people show up for her to vote.
It's true.
The endorsements don't hold that much weight.
Also, there were prominent black leaders that were endorsing Biden as well.
Well, you can't blame the Democratic establishment for that, because even as a black person, I was leaning more towards Biden.
Exactly. I think that's where I was going to, is like, you can't, blame the DNC for like people endorsing Biden who are outside of the political system, and who are like actually like activists,
right?
And who like worked for voting rights and stuff in the 60s. So like it's leaving out the fact, like coming up with all these excuses is leaving out the fact that people voted a certain way, and that's just how the cookie crumbled, and this is where we're at.
Exactly. People voted a certain way, or they didn't show up.
And you discount. We can't discount all the
opinions and beliefs,
all the black voices that actually voted for him.
Yeah.
I mean, like the southern black people voted overwhelmingly for Biden.
Yeah.
There's no factual, there's no alternative to that, unfortunately, and the numbers don't add up. So, unfortunately, Bernie couldn't close that gap at all.
Well, the other theory is that people believe that Warren stayed in the race longer to, siphon potential votes away from Bernie.
Right, yeah, that was another thing, too.
I thought that was actually probably the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard.
First of all, you would have to have every single Warren supporter vote for Bernie after she dropped out, which would not happen. It just statistically doesn't make any sense.
Well, here's the kicker. In order to even have delegates, you have to at least get 15% of the vote.
Right, yeah.
So, or you don't get anything. So, even if she was in, let's say she stayed in throughout the rest of the entire contest, both Bernie and Biden were getting 40 or 50 or 30. She wasn't even trending.
Yeah.
So, how is she siphoning votes away when she's not even contributing to the delegate count because she's not?
It's just the denial of reality and facts.
And the other thing too is that even as candidates drop out, they're still on the ballots if the ballots have been made and printed.
Yeah.
They don't make new ballots every time someone drops out of their race.
Exactly. And a lot of people voted.
That's why Bernie was still in the New York ballot when he dropped out, because the ballots were already made.
Yeah, totally.
So it's it's just, I understand that people are upset and they're butthurt, but at the same time.
But at the same time, we can't be waiting for a hero to come and fix this.
We have to rally behind the one kid that is standing up to the bully, even if he's not the one that we believe has the strength to, put him in his place the way we want him to.
Yeah.
But if he stands up to the bully and gets other people to see that and they rally behind him, we can
Listen, you don't need to love Biden. It's the settle for Biden thing. You don't need to he's not the perfect candidate. It's that's reality. This is where we're at.
Right.
What do you do with that is now the question.
Right.
Going backwards and blah 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 and complaining doesn't really do anything. We're still we still have down ballot races that are extremely important.
Mm-hmm.
We have Cori Bush, who just won her primary, and
this is why it's still important to show up and vote.
It's still so important to be thinking about the bigger picture rather than just the White House,
right?
Because the bigger picture is going to get that structural change that we
100%. Because the laws are bills are made in Congress. That's really where it is. So the laws that you want, it happens in Congress, which is why it's important for you to show up. I've always approached it this way. Let's say AOC was able to get the Green New Deal passed through Congress.
Mm-hmm.
And let's say, she was able to get a slim majority of the Senate to pass, vote on the Green New Deal. Now, let's say that bill lands in front of the White House. Would you rather have Joe Biden signing that, or having it land on Donald Trump's desk.
Exactly. Well, yeah, I mean, like,
simple and easy as that. It's literally
very easy.
That's literally what it comes down to. You know, it's like,
well, it's all about like, it's like what Angela Davis was saying. Everybody's passing around that clip right now of like her talking about like what you kind of have to, like, in this moment, you kind of have to help yourself move the needle forward, or else you're fucking all the progress that we're trying to make. You 100%. Know what I mean?
Like, look at how much was undone in 4 years. Like, imagine what more will be undone.
Well, it's a little scary thinking about what he can do in the next 4 years, because he has no check. And then if we don't come out and vote, there's going to be absolutely no check. And then right now we see his dismantling of you know, public institutions like the U.S. Post Office, who's like that shit like employs people to, and it's a time-honored tradition of America.
It's in our Constitution, actually,
like,
to have a post office.
To have a post office and to be using it and tinkering with it in an election year during a pandemic. It's so blatant what he's doing and can do.
Yeah, because
without any sort of...
He's been given free rein.
Yeah, exactly.
And all the chambers of government seem to, you know, be in cahoots. Like, there's no checks and balances with the justice.
Talk about deep state.
Right?
You know, like, I also, like, you know, if any, like, people who are Trump supporters are watching this, I just want to know, I just don't understand the contradictory stuff that happens. So, like, drain the swamp, yet we're putting, like, millionaires and billionaires in cabinet.
Right.
People from Wall Street are literally, like,
because they don't believe that's what's happening, I think.
Right. But it's like, on paper, we see the appointments, we see who's being put in power, how he's wielding power to stifle free speech. And I'm like, what? Like, it's not free speech for some people. It's free speech for everyone.
Well, that's the thing. I think...
And it's like this kind of, like, jockeying of... There's so many contradictions. Of,
right.
Like,
well, I think for them, they don't feel like their lives are going to be impacted negatively by it. You know, because majority of the people that... They look on the media, the majority of the people that are up in arms are screaming about injustice look like you, look like me.
Right.
Or, you know, or women.
Well, so this is my thing, is like, whenever, like, yeah, so obviously black, brown people, like, you know, minorities, women, we're all kind of in this fight and what have you. I mean, like, once they're done with us, they're coming after your rights too. You know what I mean? Like, I always, like, had this, like, feeling that, like...
You think so?
You like, if you give authoritarian power to a government, they're going to exercise that to the end.
That's very true.
It's just like a huge power, it's a huge power vacuum, and like they will keep on doing what they're doing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
For corporations to get what they need.
Yeah.
For pharmaceuticals to get what they need.
Well, I feel like it's been in the core history of this country. Like, are you familiar with Shays Rebellion?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like pretty much that exact type of thing. It's like, even then, the only reason that we, you know, eventually created a federal army and got rid of the Articles of Confederation and created a constitution is because, you know, the wealthy people were afraid that their property was going to get burned to the ground by Minutemen who fought for, you know, American liberation. These people went back home and saw that their lands were repossessed or they were evicted because they weren't paying their rents after risking their lives for this country.
Yeah, right.
So, like, even then, you know, the country was looking out for a particular group of people because the Constitution...
I think it's always been looking out for a particular group of people, right? From the beginning.
I mean, what was the role to vote? You had to be over 18 and owned land.
And owning land was wealth. You know?
that already alienated. Like,
it's just astounding to me that, you know, people vote against their own interests.
It's
so like
all the time.
So like it's like, you know, you're voting for somebody who said that they were going to do something, and literally nothing has moved on the subject. Like, you voted for somebody who said, we're going to work on drug prices for y'all, and then drug prices are like, I mean, like, pharmaceutical companies right now are like making so much money off of the pandemic, and like it's
just because he has a lot of investments in pharmaceutical companies.
But it affects people. It affects everyone across the political spectrum.
The fact that you can get cheaper drugs shipped from India to the United States versus buying that drug in the United States is ridiculous.
It's as bad as ever.
It's ridiculous. Like, from India. And I guess I'm exposing that, but I mean, people know that already, I think.
I think so. I mean, like, I think, you know...
the same drug, by the way.
I think this whole time is showing the real, like, truth about what this country is right now. It's you know, it's hard to digest that all of this exists in our beautiful land of America, I think, you know, it has seeped into a consciousness that's outside of just a liberal bubble, I think.
You think so?
Yeah.
I really feel that a lot of people, you know, at the end of the day, people care about themselves and money.
Well, yeah. That's why it's really important for, I mean, like, yes, that makes sense. And I just want to frame this the right way, but like, you know, in this country, you have to be like affected by an issue in order to like care about it. And that's why it's super important to get back to messaging and show people and build those bridges with people on the other side that this does affect you. Yeah. And it actually like is costing you money. And
that is it. That's exactly it.
But it is costing you money, and you could actually maybe amass more wealth for your family rather than letting people who don't who don't have your interests in mind, letting them get wealthy rather than you.
100%.
You know? So it's messaging, I guess.
Right. So the question now is like, how do we get on track to the right messaging to make the ones that don't understand?
Well, I think there's a whole movement of progressives that are actually really good at messaging.
Really? Because a lot of their messaging I've seen has not been the most.
No, I think AOC has a really galvanizing message that, you know, I think she's able to like, she's scary to a lot of people because the Republicans have made her scary. But if you listen to her talk, like, if she was able to explain, she's able to explain things in like a biteable, breathable way that makes sense.
But here's the question. It's like, you know, she's already been put into that that scary boat. She is unfortunately categorized and viewed in the same boat as the Clintons and the Pelosi's and things like that.
Which is crazy because that's the Clintons and the Pelosi's. She's not like an establishment person. Yeah.
No, but in terms of like how, you know,
she's like a scary socialist.
How she's just like scary to conservatives.
Right.
You know, like people hear Pelosi, they think she's the devil.
Yeah,
you know, people hear Clinton, they think she's the devil. Totally. You know, people look at AOC, they're like, she's a devil in training. You know, it's like
I understand that. Yeah, I get that. So I think maybe it's a matter of like electing people that have good messaging skills.
Right. I mean, that's the thing. It's like, where are they? Because I do, you know, I think that there are a lot of great ideas coming out of the progressive wing, but I also feel that they have yet to truly master messaging in a way that is good for appealing to like the moderates.
You know, it's not perfect, but you know, the work that is being done by progressives is working. I mean, like BLM years ago, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, 7 years ago, like that was very unpopular, and now they're like insanely popular, and they have like, You know what I mean? Like,
here's the thing,
message
though. The problem, but this is where I my
more
messaging,
people
though.
are grabbing onto it.
Here's my thing about messaging, though. It's like, if you have to explain what your messaging means, then I think you have a messaging problem.
Right. I.e., like, defund the police, maybe.
I wanted to say that for another time, because that is, I can go, like, into the rabbit hole with that.
yeah, right.
You know, like...
No, I understand that.
And that's the thing. And when you hear, even as much as and when you hear, like, Black Lives Matter, it is, I think it's a great soundbite. But then the counter to that, people would say, well, what about these people's lives, You're like, well, because your lives aren't the ones being affected, and these are the lives that are being affected. You do believe that all lives matter.
You're going to have that no matter what your messaging is. And if it's, like, it actually is...
I don't know. Like, Ted Cruz killed it. Legal good, illegal bad.
But there's always going to be... There's going to find something wrong. The other side's always going to, like, grab onto something.
So give me the other side's version of... Like, grab onto something wrong with the illegal, wrong, legal good.
But that's hard to do for, like, you know what I mean? That's hard to do when it's like you're switching, like, it's like.
But that's what I'm saying, though. It's like, but that's what I'm saying, though. You hear that, and it just, to the base, it just makes sense. And even to me, it makes sense, even though I understand the nuances of it are not that simple.
But I think it's, like, important to have something strong.
No, I agree.
Black Lives Matter.
I agree in having something strong.
You know what I mean? Like,
I agree in having something strong.
And it's like,
but,
you can...
But you don't want to... Like, my thing is, strong is good. But if your initial statement turns off more people initially than bringing them into the fold, then you have a messaging problem.
So, I want to speak to that, too, because, like... Yes, defund the police. It was like this big thing that I think a lot of conservatives that I know were really afraid of.
Right.
You know, and it actually opened up conversation for me to talk to them. Like, I had a long conversation with this woman that I went to high school with, who's very conservative.
But it gives the conservatives ammunition because they can spin it.
Yeah, they're always going to spin it.
Right, but they're spinning it with the progressives' own words.
Right.
So that is a messaging point.
What do you, like, think is the solution to that?
I would say I would just call it police reform. No, it's generic, but essentially that is what is happening.
But haven't we already called it police reform in the past? Like, changing the way that people are trained, like diversity training, and like it's like sounds like the same shit, right?
No, the reason why I think it's different, and because, like, there has never been a massive, cross racial, cross ethnicities, cross social economic background, like, support for it.
Right.
Like, if it was just black people making noise about it, eventually people would, not care. But the fact that everyone, a lot of people are making noise about it, and a lot of people are interested, a lot of people want to be a part of the necessary change that exists, you now have their ears. So use the proper messaging to keep that attention.
Yeah.
And
messaging comes with education, though, right? I mean, like,
right.
and when we have, like, defund the police, then we educate what that means after.
Right, but, like, you say defund the police, you'll get people that'll stay and want a little bit more understanding. It's like, is that really what you mean? But you'll instantly turn a lot of people off.
Right.
Like, for example, they asked Joe Biden, do you support, defund the police? And now, this is someone who has to represent not just the progressives, but every other type of liberal that exists in this country. Well, this
is somebody who's running for president who has to represent literally everyone in the country.
Exactly. So that's why, but that's the thing. That's why messaging is important.
Yeah.
And he said, no, I'm not in favor of defunding. I am in favor of this. And everything that he explained was exactly what
defunding the police
exactly. But because he didn't say defund,
No.
he did not turn people away.
Right.
I would rather have, the messaging that keeps people's attention, doesn't turn them away, and still gets the same thing across instead of having a cool sounding soundbite.
The expediency of like getting shit done.
Yeah, I would rather call it police reform. I don't care how boring it sounds, but if you have enough people hashtagging it and walking around with those signs, you'll get it done. Even if it's the same exact thing as defund the police.
Yeah, totally.
It's kind of like,
yeah, because like Tucker Carlson is like taking defund the police, and like every single night he's like talking about these horror stories of things happening in America, blah blah blah.
Exactly.
It's just like really funny.
Exactly.
That like there's no like.
It's all semantics. It's all semantics, and it really comes down to that. It's like, liberals, especially progressives, have this tendency to preach to the choir, and a lot of their stuff stays in that echo chamber. Right. It really does.
You have to break out.
You have to break out of the echo chamber and realize that people receive information in different ways. Yeah. It's kind of like, it's the communication equivalent to like love languages. No, it's true though. People receive things differently. Yeah. And you have to adapt and understand how other people receive things. You have to understand that some people need to understand it in religious terms, just the way that it is.
Right.
Some people need to understand it in literal terms. Some can understand it in sound bites. Some can understand it in hashtags. Some can understand it in memes. Some can understand it in policy.
Yeah, and legalese.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
No, I
so
understand
it's
your point. It's about like, make the statement and then build the bridges somehow. And if the statement's self-defeating, like if the statement's too much for a bridge to even be built, then what's the point?
Exactly. 100%.
I understand what you're saying. Like, 100%. I totally do. I totally get it. I just like, when you're protesting in the streets, you need something fucking effective. You know what I mean? And strong and gets the fucking point across.
Yes, I believe I agree with that.
And that speaks to the anger that is happening too. You know what I mean? It's not it's like, go hard in that instance, but what is the point of all that noise and going hard if it doesn't get people to the ballot box? But I think it's okay that initial flashpoint happened where that's where we're at right now, right?
Right, but they hearken on they dwell on that flashpoint.
Yeah.
Too much. It's like, I get it. Listen, there were people chanting with anger and protesting the pain and just all the hardships that they were experiencing even back in the 60s. Okay? All that protesting, that same type of protesting is happening today.
Yeah.
The only way to actually have that change is to win over the other people and get them to the ballot box. That's the only way. Because we can make as much noise as we want and have our big statements as long as we want. But again, it's that echo chamber, so.
Well, I think now it's like we do have to do the work.
We have to do the work. We need to change our strategy. We have to build the bridge.
Yeah, you do have to do the work.
How do we appeal
having
to the
how to have a conversation with people that makes those connections happen and understanding occur.
You have to meet them where they are.
Yeah. Well, that's a big undertaking that I think we all need to accept responsibility for and have the real conversations, not the fucking Facebook back and forth, not the Twitter back and forth, but have real conversations with people that you disagree with.
That's what Obama said.
And also just speech. Yeah, just talk to people.
Yeah.
I was casting for a show and I was talking to somebody who's huge NRA gun blah blah blah. I'm for background checks and stuff like that. But we connected no matter what because I know she's a human being.
Right.
And I used to shoot with my grandpa when I was a kid. There are connections that are made that you can make with somebody and it automatically disarms them. Mm-hmm. I mean, so to speak. And
I see what you did there. I see what you did there.
But
clever, ladies and gentlemen.
you know, there are ways to like have a real conversation with people, even though like they're you just have to disarm them a little bit. You know. Oh, I don't know.
I mean, yeah, I agree with that, and I think the right semantics and the right terminology and the right that helps. It really helps.
Yeah.
You know, I'd rather bring people to the conversation than, you know, turn them off from the conversation.
I get that. Yeah.
And just you have to do the work. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Do the work.
Gosh, my head is exploding right now.
We had a lot of things. We talked about a lot.
We did, and I'm trying to remember because we initially had a topic that we were actually going to talk about, and then this just kind of happened, and we like pulled bits and elements of it because
we were trying to bring it back, but it just like got a little unwieldy.
Exactly, but
it's okay.
The point is we got somewhere, and hopefully you got something out of it. I want to give a special thanks to my guest, and he's going to say his name again so that he can say it
Daniel
the right
Gradias.
way.
Daniel Gradias.
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 There you go.
Thank you for listening.
Some Spanish for you. All I know is, ¿te gustas helado? And
¿Dónde está la zapatería?
Sure, that too.
So in closing, defund the motherfucking police. I'm just kidding.
This guy. Anyway,
I'm just kidding.
Thank you for watching, and we'll see you on the next edition. Take care.